For decades, customers entered an ordinary automotive business in Toronto without knowing that a murder victim had been buried beneath the building. When demolition workers finally uncovered her remains in 1995, investigators found evidence of at least 6 blows to the head. But the woman had no identification, no confirmed history, and no name. The most disturbing question was not simply who killed her. It was whether the business operating beside her grave had belonged to the person responsible. Before this investigation ends, we will reveal how severely degraded DNA restored the victim's identity after nearly 90 years, and how one forgotten marriage record led detectives to a man who had changed his name and disappeared into another life. The intersection of Danforth and Coxwell Avenues is part of a busy Toronto neighborhood. Cars move through the streets, businesses open and close, buildings change ownership, are renovated and eventually demolished. For most people passing through the area, there was no reason to believe one structure concealed evidence of a homicide committed decades earlier. The property at 1515 Danforth Avenue had been used as an automotive garage, later identified as part of the Robertson Motors car dealership property. A concrete floor creates permanence. Once poured, it covers the soil below and transforms the surface into an ordinary workplace. Employees can move vehicles across it. Machinery can be installed. Customers can stand only centimeters above buried evidence without ever seeing it. For nearly 6 decades, that appears to be exactly what happened here. This was not a remote woodland grave. It was not an abandoned field. The burial site became part of a functioning commercial property, hidden not through isolation, but through normality. On May 18, 1995, demolition work was underway at the property. As workers removed the building and disturbed the ground beneath it, they discovered skeletal human remains. Toronto police were called to the scene immediately. The body had not accidentally fallen into a natural opening. Investigators concluded that the woman had been intentionally buried beneath the building. A buried skeleton can still retain a history. The position of bones may show whether the body was placed deliberately. Soil layers can indicate whether a grave was dug and refilled. Personal objects may suggest a time period. Trauma to the skeleton can survive long after soft tissue has disappeared. Here, the skull carried the most important evidence. The forensic examination revealed that the woman had suffered at least 6 blunt force injuries to the head, with investigators describing the suspected weapon as hammer-like. The number and location of the injuries led authorities to classify the death as homicide without hesitation. Those injuries established how violently her life had ended, but they did not reveal who she was. Without a name, investigators could not reconstruct her relationships, movements, or disappearance. They could not ask relatives when they last saw her. They could not search marriage records effectively. They could not determine who might have benefited from her absence. The grave had preserved evidence of murder. It had not preserved an obvious identity. The unidentified woman became known publicly as the Danforth Lady. Forensic specialists estimated that she had been a young adult. Police appeals attempted to reach anyone who remembered a woman disappearing from the neighborhood many decades earlier. But memory is fragile. By 1995, anyone who had known the victim in the 1930s might have been elderly or already dead. The case faced a fundamental cold case problem. Police had found the crime scene before they found the victim's story. Every theory depended on discovering who she had been. And for more than 25 years, that question remained completely unanswered. In 2022, Toronto police selected the case for Project 31, an initiative using investigative genetic genealogy to examine unidentified human remains and long unsolved homicides. Traditional forensic DNA comparison asks whether crime scene DNA matches a known person already in a law enforcement database. Investigative genetic genealogy works differently. scientists develop a detailed genetic profile and search for distant biological relationships that help researchers build family trees. Those family trees do not automatically identify a victim. They create leads that must be verified through historical records, interviews, and direct DNA comparisons. The Danforth Lady's remains presented an extreme technical challenge. The DNA was old and severely degraded. The first evidence submitted for advanced testing did not produce enough usable material. Scientists returned to the remains and attempted additional extractions. Multiple rounds of testing were required. The breakthrough did not come from one perfect sample, it came from persistence. Each unsuccessful extraction narrowed the remaining options, and each surviving fragment of DNA carried a small part of a family history that had been hidden since the 1930s. By November 2024, specialists had finally produced a suitable DNA profile. Genealogical analysis pointed towards Scottish ancestry connected to the Aberdeen area, shifting the investigation across the Atlantic and backward through generations. Researchers began constructing family lines, examining births, marriages, immigration records, and descendants. Potential relatives were identified. Their DNA was compared with the profile developed from the remains. The relationship testing confirmed that the woman beneath the building belonged to a specific family. After almost 90 years, the Danforth Lady finally had a name. She was born Mary MacLeod Davidson in Aberdeenshire, Scotland, in 1905. In 1913, when she was still a child, she immigrated to Canada with her family. She grew up far from the country of her birth and eventually married Andrew Lloyd Moffat. Giving Mary her name transformed the case entirely. Investigators could now search for her husband. They could compare addresses. They could examine businesses connected to the couple. They could ask what happened to Mary after she disappeared from public records. Historical evidence, family interviews, and material recovered from the burial site led police to conclude that she was likely murdered around April 1936. The identification did more than restore Mary's identity. It made the burial location deeply meaningful. The tire business beside the grave was no longer merely an old commercial property. It was directly connected to her husband. Toronto police determined that Andrew Lloyd Moffat operated a tire business adjacent to the location where Mary's remains were eventually discovered. Investigators also found that he later abandoned her, entered into additional marriages and assumed another identity, eventually living under the name Drake Lloyd Cummings. The sequence created a deeply troubling picture. Mary disappeared around 1936. Her body was buried near property associated with her husband's business. She had suffered repeated blows from a hammer-like object, and her husband later behaved as though his marriage to Mary no longer existed. He lived in the United States and later in Vancouver. He died in 1985, 10 years before demolition workers found Mary's remains. That timing eliminated the possibility of interrogation. No search could recover his memories. No prosecution could compel him to answer evidence in court. Toronto police now identify him as the primary suspect, but he was never arrested, tried, or convicted. The conclusion is based on the modern investigation, not a verdict delivered in court. The case could be solved historically, it could not be prosecuted criminally, and that is the difference between identifying the most likely truth and proving guilt before a living defendant. For 31 years after her remains were discovered, the public knew her only through a location, the Danforth Lady. That label described where she was found. It did not describe who she was. Mary was a daughter of Scottish immigrants. She crossed an ocean as a child. She built a life in Canada. She married, and then she disappeared so completely that her grave remained beneath a commercial building for almost 60 years. Modern forensic work could not give her back the life that was taken, but It returned her to her family history. The case file no longer begins with unknown woman. It begins with Mary MacLeod Moffat. Here is what can be confirmed. Mary MacLeod Moffat was born in Aberdeenshire, Scotland in 1905 and immigrated to Canada in 1913. Investigators believe she was killed around April 1936. She suffered at least 6 blunt force injuries to the head from a hammer-like weapon. Her body was intentionally buried beneath a building near Danforth and Coxwell Avenues in Toronto. Demolition workers discovered her remains on May 18, 1995. After multiple attempts to recover severely degraded DNA, forensic specialists produced a usable profile in November 2024. Investigative genetic genealogy identified her publicly on July 27, 2026. Her husband, Andrew Lloyd Moffat, operated a tire business adjacent to the place where her remains were found, later entered additional marriages and lived under the name Drake Lloyd Cummings. He died in 1985. Toronto police identify him as the primary suspect, but he was never prosecuted or convicted. What remains unknown is how Mary's final hours unfolded. Was she killed at or near the business? Did anyone else know what had happened? For almost 90 years, Mary's killer escaped legal judgment. For almost 60 years, her grave remained hidden beneath an ordinary business. But her identity survived in fragments of DNA, in immigration records, and in relatives who never knew their family history contained an unsolved murder. The building could hide the grave. It could not erase her name forever.